And we're live with another Mike and Mitch podcast. I'm always Mike, Mitch over here. We can get started talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs.
All right. So Eastern Conference Final. We're back knotted up 2-2.
Yep.
After both teams lost both of their home games.
Yep.
It seems to be a theme this playoffs. A little bit.
Well, it's kind of that theme with Washington too, because they've lost 2 games away, but home they just can't seem to.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I know there's always the theory with the Capitals fans that as soon as something bad happens at home, they always just assume the worst.
They're just gonna.
I mean, you want to think better of the team that doesn't affect them at all. But I mean,
when it happens year after year, it kind of the thing that happens
embeds into the culture. Yeah.
But then it always goes back to if they lose, it's like, oh, is it all on Ovechkin, or how that always comes down?
Yeah, it always
you should strip the C off of Ovechkin.
Yeah, I've never.
And the fact that they're right here in the Eastern Conference is kind of impressive to me, because I didn't really expect them to do that well this year.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. I mean, if you want to continue the talk of the expectations and the all of a sudden the expectation that they're going to lose with. This year, it wasn't there. I mean, last year they built up so much. They traded for Kevin Shattenkirk, and the assumption was, okay, this is the year they're finally going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And once they lost last year, I think everyone just kind of everyone
focused
on everyone wrote them off. Everyone started focusing on Pittsburgh, maybe going for the three-peat. Nobody really even gave them a chance, and because of that, there was the expectations that had been there for probably about a decade, ever since Ovechkin's been there, kind of went away. But back to Ovechkin. I mean, his numbers in these playoffs, every playoff, I mean, they're always good. It's never really been his fault in any season. He's always shown up for the playoffs. That false narrative always seems to follow any captain that can't seem to win in the playoffs, and it really always seems to go back
he's
to.
He's 5th with 20 points in the playoffs this year.
He's been great, and he's been great throughout his entire career. And I think this false narrative with the playoffs has also hindered his just overall legacy. I don't think people realize
both him and Kuznetsov have definitely gone off this playoffs, which has helped them.
Oh yeah, definitely. And getting Backstrom back, I mean, you assume helps, although they did lose his first game back. But with Ovechkin, overall, I mean, his entire career, people don't talk about him as much as they should. I mean, he is the only player since Wayne Gretzky. It's got his scoring record, the all-time goal record. He's the only guy who has come anywhere close. Yeah. I mean, at the moment, he's not exactly close, but if he can continue to play at least at about a 40-goal pace for the next 6-7 years, he has the chance to actually pass Wayne Gretzky, and that's something that really nobody seems to talk about. But as my mic flies away,
the only thing is he is 32, so.
Yeah, he is getting up there in age, but I mean, last year I think a lot of people thought, okay, there it is. He's starting to decline, but this year, I mean, his numbers went right back up. He was going to win the Rocket Richard again this year.
Mm-hmm.
I blame nothing on Alex Ovechkin over the past few years in terms of playoff success. I mean, last year they outplayed the Penguins and they ran into a hot goalie and in Matt Murray in Marc-Andre Fleury, and they couldn't get past him, and this year, at least last night, it looked like more of the same with Washington dominating and Andre Vasilevsky just playing out of his mind.
It is weird in these playoffs. For once, I just don't really care who wins. There's no team I like. I mean, I don't really like Washington, but I'm okay if they were to win. But none of these teams I really would mind if they won.
See, selfishly speaking, I chose the Lightning to win the Stanley Cup at the beginning of the season, at the beginning of the playoffs. So I want them to win. I like Alex Ovechkin, but fuck that. I want my pick to win. And in the West, I didn't even pick Vegas to go out of the first round, which I think a lot of people didn't do. I thought that they had a chance to maybe make it to the conference final just because their road there in the Pacific Division was pretty easy, but I didn't think they were going to win 2 games against Winnipeg. I had a hard time believing they were going to win 1 with the amount of depth offensively and defensively that Winnipeg has, and just to echo what I just said, fuck the Golden Knights. I know a lot of people love the story and everything, and it is crazy what they've done, but what have they earned? in terms of a fan base. Like fuck that. I think you need to
and
suffer.
it's
a
also
little
one
bit.
of those things like, is the fan base actually for them, or is that just hockey fans going in Vegas to see a Stanley Cup game?
Well, I mean, I think in the regular season you saw a lot more of that. I know when the Flyers played in Vegas, there was a large contingent of Flyers fans, and I think also that's just because it's the first season and it's in Vegas, so a lot of people want to see that as like a chance to vacation in Vegas, go to Vegas and see some hockey games. In the playoffs, I mean, their fans have been great all season, but especially in the playoffs, I mean, when you watch their games, you don't see a whole hell of a lot of visiting fans, at least not as much as you'd expect. So
it's not like last year where you have one team where they can't sell out. All these teams can sell out easily.
Oh, yeah, and Vegas has done a great job in building up a fan base, and I'm not saying that they don't have any real fans or anything. I'm just saying they haven't suffered an ounce with this team. They just seem to keep winning and winning and winning.
I mean, that's what helped them grow the fans so quickly. If it would have been like something where it's like every other kind of team that comes in
exactly.
in their inaugural season where they're just not good.
Yeah, when you
like the only other thing I can kind of relate this to, even though it's not like this or Colorado.
The Avalanche winning their first season, they're winning the Stanley Cup. Obviously that was a relocation, but
it's a relocation, but still
it's still a new city, and first year it really helps to build up a fan base. But for Vegas, it's mind blowing. I still don't really understand. I mean, when you look at their numbers,
it's all just, that first line.
It's Marchessault, Smith, Carlson, especially Marchessault, 17 points in 13 games, and then of course it's
Fleury.
It's Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah,
and we saw it a couple nights ago with those two incredible saves back to back. Mark Scheifele both taking. It's not like that's a grinder taking those shots.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've seen it in the playoffs before.
But that last game was actually close. That's the closest game I think they've had since.
Yeah, I mean,
the series started, because the first two games in Winnipeg kind of both went like.
Yeah,
and one
differing results, but they had the same in that they were both blowout or closer to blowouts. But yeah, this one it seemed Winnipeg, at least in the third period, really piled it on in terms of shots and opportunities. But the Golden Knights had Marc-Andre Fleury, and
that's what you need to win Stanley Cup. Is just a hot goalie at the right time.
Every year there's a team who isn't that great,
but they have a goalie.
Not that Vegas isn't great. I mean, they're a good team, but there's one team that always seems to fly above their means because of a goaltender. I mean, you saw it last year with Craig Anderson, obviously Erik Karlsson,
Rene, if you want to put him in there, Martin Jones. Maybe.
Yeah, there's always a team that seems to ride a hot goaltender in the playoffs. And then move on to some Flyers talk here.
All right.
This offseason, I'm having a hard time getting a read on what's going to happen. And I think it's mainly because we're in a situation where Ron Hextall's never been in a spot where his main goal, at least we assume, is to add to the NHL roster.
Yeah.
So everything thus far has been future. And with the team being the number 3 team in the Metropolitan Division this season, the expectations are that they're going to win a playoff round next year, at least around the city. And this is time. It's time to add, and we haven't seen him do that. So I really don't know what to expect at all for this.
And you
season.
couldn't probably expect them to maybe go for a defenseman, especially if Warren's out for
Sam Morin had knee surgery after an injury in the playoffs, and rumor is that he'll be out months. It's not really known what the knee surgery was. Obviously, it depends on what it was. I mean, if it was meniscus, then it's not as long of a recovery time. But then you could also have an Anthony Stolar situation where there's a re-injury that happens fairly often with that.
And then he's out for like the whole season.
Or it could be ACL, and that could affect him in the future. So you don't really know. We don't really know what the injury is. And with the knee injury, it always seems like it's something that it's very serious. But again, you could be Shane Gostisbehere and tear your ACL, and for the rest of his career, it hasn't seemed to hinder him. That happened back when he was in the AHL. Yeah. So I would presume that the Flyers, at least now, are more likely to try to add a defenseman. I don't know if they would have anyway.
Maybe it's like maybe not a seventh position. So maybe it's like a seventh going in. Just
could-
because they're already losing Manning, so I don't know if
with Manning gone, presumably now, obviously
Yeah.
we don't know what this does to Brandon Manning. Hopefully he's gone, because we
Yeah.
know not that Brandon Manning's a bad 7 or even a number 6 defenseman. It's just with this coach, he's going to play him much more than he should.
Yeah, with Gudis,
and
the
with
pair
Gudis.
has been
it was terrible all last year. It's a big reason why they lost in the playoffs. So a
lot of people blame Gudis for the Game 6 loss, but
I mean, he played terribly.
He did.
He was awful, but at the end of the day, you cannot keep those two together when they played so poorly, and he just kept playing together.
That's the line you keep together, but you don't keep Ghost and Provorov together. That doesn't make sense to me.
Mind blowing, but
I mean, I know Ghost wasn't like the best in the playoffs, but
no, he didn't play well in the playoffs. But his best
and
chance
that's not
to play
taking
well
anything away
was
from
Provorov.
McDonald, because he did fairly okay with Provorov.
I mean, McDonald this past season as a whole, he was better than he has been the past few years.
But is that also just because he had Manning and people that were kind of worse than him that kind of shined light off him a little?
I think that's definitely a big reason why he wasn't getting as much criticism. But he played like an NHL defenseman, and in the past he hasn't.
I also think because Jeff and I talked about this last time we had the podcast about McDonald, and I just always felt with everyone giving him so much crap, it's because that he has such a huge contract, and living up to that contract, you have certain
you have expectations of what that guy will be, and
he hasn't lived up to it at all.
And you can't. I know a lot of people like to hate on Andrew McDonald, and myself included, but you can't really blame the guy. I mean, nobody's gonna say, "Oh, I'm not."
Yeah.
4 years or how many? Fuck, it was 5 years, 20 million. Is that what it was?
Something like
30
that.
million.
30 million.
You're not gonna say no.
No.
So I mean, I can't blame him as a person, but obviously Paul Holmgren, that's another story.
That's also one of those things with going forward with Simmons, with his contract up next season. If you trade him or if you keep him, what you give him as a contract?
I mean, if I'm keeping him, and I very much don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm not even really. I used to be kind of on the fence on this, but I'm really at the point where I think that they have to trade him. And when I say I have to trade him, I think they really should trade him this offseason at the draft, whenever. Just get him out of here this offseason. Not that it's anything personal with him. It's just the contract situation, the amount of money he's going to demand, the amount of money that other teams would be willing to pay him, and the value that he has
for someone
in the open
already
market.
in his 30s.
Yeah, and he's in his 30s, so he's not going to. I mean,
and also money you could use for another younger player that needs
exactly. Ivan Provorov and all them are going to need new contracts soon. But with Simmons, I mean, if you're paying him $6.5 million, $6 million, $7 million, right now, I mean, his first year or two, he might be worth that contract, but he's going to get multiple years. He's going to get probably 5 or 6 years,
and
there's no way he's going to be worth that.
And as he's shown in this season, that he's willing to play with a torn pelvic.
Yeah, a torn pelvic muscle, and
a bunch of other injuries, but not just because he want to play.
Torn pelvic muscle to me makes no sense, because he came into training camp with the injury.
Yeah.
And he didn't know beforehand, but he came into training camp, and the doctors found that he had torn a pelvic muscle, and he could have gotten surgery then. And yes, he probably would have missed some of the beginning of the season, but a lot of that's training camp time. And obviously, you want that time to train and everything, but how well can you train if you? And
you might have started off the year slow, but you were already starting off the year slow anyways, when you were hurt.
It will not only start off the year slow, it finished the year. The whole entire year was. I mean, his numbers aren't.
No, I was just saying, for if he had the surgery, then he would probably still start off slow because he wouldn't have the training camp. But
exactly. But
even playing hurt.
But anyway, it's either struggle to start because you didn't have the training camp to train, and then you get better from the surgery.
Yeah.
You get more training, and you do better eventually.
Or
but in his case, he played poorly the entire year.
Or like Nolan Patrick, he came into the year hurt. And then near the end, he started getting better.
At the start of the year, I don't know if he was necessarily hurt, but he didn't have the time in training camp. He didn't have the summer training to be able to get as acclimated as he would have wanted to even playing hockey, not to mention at the NHL level. So by the end of the year, when he started to acclimate himself more, he was great. I mean, he
solidified the second center spot.
Yeah, he was 100%
after the beginning of the season, it was always a toss-up between him and Filppula taking that second center line spot.
And he didn't deserve it. I mean, Nolan Patrick did not play well at the start of the season, but by the end of it, he was a bona fide second line center. I had no problem.
It also took for him finding good line mates to help him come out of that too.
Yeah, I mean, it
helps being with Voracek.
Lindblom, and Nolan Patrick in that last few months of the season was great. I mean, ever since Lindblom came up, that line, the two of them together, Lindblom and Nolan Patrick, worked very well together, which is great to see just in the future. I mean, those are two guys that you assume are going to be here for many years. And, I mean, the thing that the hottest of takes that I have in terms of the Flyers offseason, in that, like, I'm not sure how much anyone or most people would agree with this, but I think the Flyers need to acquire a goalie.
You think so?
I think that they need to acquire a
starting goalie. Are you
thinking
thinking that just because Neuvirth's probably going to get hurt and then you want to back up for that situation? Or
I'm not saying a backup. I'm saying a starting goalie. And
over Elliott.
I say this because Brian Elliott, I mean, I like the guy. I mean, he played as well as we expected. Yeah. He didn't play below expectations. No. I don't think there was anything more.
Everything was coming into the season was saying the season hinged on how well he played, and it didn't turn out to be that way.
And he played,
and he wasn't the best, but he made key saves.
He played at his talent level, which is at best average goalie, probably mediocre starting goalie. Mm-hmm. But for me, when I'm looking at this team, and I'm looking at their two best players, their two best offensive players, at least. Mm-hmm. Claude Giroux, who should have been a Hart finalist, although we won't get to that.
No. We talked about that last time. So.
And Jakub Voracek. Those are two guys in their late 20s.
Yeah.
And when we're all saying, everyone's always saying with Brian Elliott, with Michael Neuvirth, these guys are stopgaps until we get to Carter Hart.
Yeah.
And even if we do assume that Carter Hart does become that goalie we want him to be, that finally having a franchise goalie for a decade, I think people aren't looking into the future enough to see when that's going to be.
Yeah.
Because if we look at it next year, he's not going to be on the Flyers.
No.
I mean, and that's nothing against him. That's just as a 20-year-old. I mean, that's just not
even
something
if one of them gets
often.
hurt. It would most likely be Lyon or Stolarz, whoever the other goalie is at that time.
Exactly. The goalies, even goalies that have come up, great goalies who have played in that year as their 20-year-old, they haven't played well. I mean, guys like Carey Price is one of them. I mean, and they've gone on to have great careers, but as a 20-year-old, it's just something that's not.
No. Goalies do take
rare.
So long to get ready.
They take a lot longer to cook, and so we'll say all of next year with the Phantoms, no problem with that at all. Yeah. And then we're pushing it back to the 2019-2020 season, and
that's
I assume
also assuming that he puts up similar numbers to his juniors, but the AHL isn't obviously the same.
Yeah, I mean,
and you could make the case for after next season when you have Sandstrom up with them.
Yeah,
He's been playing in the better league, but still, you never really know how that's going to play out either.
In the 2019-20 season, I'll be optimistic, say that Hart makes the team as a backup. You have Brian Elliott and Carter Hart as the two goaltenders, and you split time because Ron Hextall has said that if they're going to play in the NHL, they're going to play, unless your name's Travis Hanheim.
Hold on. It depends on the coach.
Yeah, it's true. But 2019-2020, we'll say that Hart is a split starter. And then 2020-2021, then, okay, he'll be the starter.
Yeah.
He'll be the starter. I think then he'll be 23 years old. He'll be the starter. I don't know if we can really expect that he will be good enough to lead this team to a Stanley Cup, to even lead them to be a contender for the Stanley Cup, because he'll be 23 years old. It'll be his first time starting in the NHL. I don't think that's really fair on him to expect him to do that.
And I don't think I'm taking a huge risk saying this, but he's not like a Fleury either, who's really young and then really good that can just come in and dominate. But he's not going to be that.
So, and then we're getting into 2020, 2021, 2021, 2022. By the time he's ready to be a starter and, at best case scenario, ready to lead this team to a Stanley Cup. And by then, I mean, your best players, your Claude Giroux, your Jakub Voraceks, are in their early to mid-30s.
Yeah.
And, you hope that they can continue to at least produce at a top 6 level. And I think that can even be realistic, but for how long? It's probably only going to be for a couple of years. And how long do we want this team to be in a championship contending window? You want it to be for longer than that. So for me, I think that they should acquire a goaltender for the next couple of years. Worst case scenario is in a couple of years, Carter Hart's ready to start for the team and play at a really high level, a la Matt Murray with Marc-Andre Fleury being there.
Or
and
Vasilevsky.
And then you could just trade the other guy.
Yeah.
I mean, how hard? What is this really? Where
we've done it before with Bobrovsky.
Or we're really in a situation where we're willing to. I mean, how is that a bad situation to have?
No.
Two starting caliber goalies who are both presumably. I mean,
help
what's
for
wrong
Pittsburgh
with that?
and their back-to-back runs.
I think if they can acquire a goalie who.
Because right
I
now
just
they
want
don't.
someone who can give him a chance now.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're just punting the next 2-3 years if you're not going out and acquiring a goalie, because at the end of the day, Brian Elliott's not winning you a Stanley Cup. He's just not.
No.
So I think they need to acquire a goalie, go out and acquire a goalie who at least has the ability
And
to
if you
pull off.
do that, you're banking a lot on that Hart can deliver. On
exactly. So
being this goalie that would be so
and
great.
even and it's not even that you're just banking on him eventually becoming a starting goalie. You're
Yeah.
banking on him doing it rather quickly. I mean, you look at Connor Hellebuck, who's had a terrific year. He's 24 years old. It took him a little while. They at the beginning of this season they brought in
Mason because
Steve Mason because they weren't trusting in Connor Hellebuck.
Yeah.
He hadn't played that great to start his career, and he turned the light on. And if it takes until he's 24 for Carter Hart, I don't know. I just don't see that big enough of a window.
I don't think that's that bad either. 24 is still pretty young to start doing well.
That's not that's not necessarily even like a bad thing for Carter Hart to be ready when he's 24, or for him to take him that long. That's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. It's just where this team's at in terms of their top end talent. They need to contend now.
Yeah.
They need to contend, and when I say they need to contend now, I mean for them to have a long enough window for where you can expect potentially bringing a Stanley Cup to Philadelphia. So I think that acquiring a goalie should be something that the Flyers are looking into, and I don't mean a backup goalie, I mean a starter. And whether
would you think if like Mrazek, if he played those like first few games, if that was like his whole time here, would you trust in him then, or? I know we wouldn't trust him now because he turned out to not be very well. But
if he had,
are you saying like a guy like in his mid-20s or like late 20s, early 30s kind of goaltender that's kind of starting?
I'm saying someone I don't. At the end of the day, age doesn't really matter because you're in this scenario. We're saying that Carter Hart's going to come in, so he could even be like a Pecorine that age, like a mid-30s guy. Right. I mean, as long as there's someone who could potentially take you to the promised land in this time when we're still at a point where we can contend. I don't really care what the age is, just because we have Carter Hart waiting in the wings.
Brizgalov.
So Ilya Brizgalov.
He's waiting. He's gone to games.
He was at the game last night. He was at the Capitals Lightning game last night. He tweeted a picture of the ice there. So moving on from that, the Lehigh Valley Phantoms are in the conference final for the AHL. They're playing the Toronto Marlies starting tomorrow. That being Saturday afternoon at 4:00.
This is another thing, kind of Flyers, kind of Phantoms too. But how well Philippe Myers is.
Philippe Myers has been terrific,
especially since. Really, I guess after his injury, and then he got paired with Sanheim when he got down. That's when he started turning it around.
By all accounts, he had been having sort of an up and down season this year, kind of inconsistent until after his injury when Travis Sanheim came. The two of them on a pairing together have been terrific. The two of them have been great together. And even when Sanheim got called back up to the Flyers. So Philippe Myers had kind of back and forth, struggled at times. Then Sanheim came back down. The two of them paired together were great. And then once Sanheim came back up, Myers continued to play at that high of a level, and he hasn't stopped. I mean, you look at it, 66 minutes in that 5 overtime game.
Yeah,
Philippe Myers played 66 minutes, and that is higher than any NHL player has ever played in an NHL game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not really known because time on ice isn't really a stat that's collected in the AHL. It's not really shown very often. It's up to the team's discretion whether or not they release that. So it's not known if that's the most ever for a professional game, at least in North America. But it very well could be 66 minutes. That's over an entire hockey game of playing, and he played at a high level. And obviously, the reason why they were playing for that long was Alex Lyon, who has a.
But you also have to think that's a steal for Hextall because he wasn't even drafted, right?
No, he wasn't drafted. I mean, Philippe Myers is. It's one of those things where it's kind of mind blowing, just because the amount of guys that get drafted especially out of juniors, that get drafted just based on their intangibles and just their. He's 6'5" and can skate. Yeah, and that wasn't something that wasn't true when he was drafted. It was just his numbers were not good. Yeah, so that was the reason why he wasn't drafted. It was his numbers, not even. Normally, it's like, okay, if you look even at the first round, a guy like Lawson Krause, who even in such a great draft in 2015 was considered by some like a top 5 prospect over a guy like Ivan Provorov, because he was 6'4" and he had like less than a point per game, but that didn't matter because he was good at battling in the corners and he looked like he was an NHL player. And normally that's what you see, but in this case it's just so strange because he has the exact makeup of a defenseman, of an all-star defenseman, the skating ability and that size that you would think that an early pick would be used. Yeah, and it just nobody picked him up.
No one did,
which is very surprising. Looking at the Phantoms, obviously the number that stands out to you is Alex Lyon.
You were saying before about Hart's like realistic abilities to come up. What would you say for Myers? I'm assuming next season he'd be back on the Phantoms again, but
I mean it depends. I mean, you look at with the injury to Sam Morin, if he's not ready for camp next year, and it doesn't appear he will be, Morin is not waiver exempt anymore, so he would have to go through waivers. So he's going to be on the Flyers next year. Yeah. No matter what, he's going to be on the Flyers. I don't see any way they haven't passed through waivers and potentially get claimed. Right. So presumably he going into next season was going to be the number 7 guy in the press box, but now, I mean, obviously with the injury that can't happen. So it could open up a spot for Myers in the lineup and push a guy, maybe like a guy like Gudis, maybe to the press box. I don't think it's likely that he makes the team. No. But with the way he's played and the way they're trusting him in Lehigh Valley, he played 66 minutes, which is more than anyone else on his team.
Longer wait than he did last preseason because he was gone. He was one of the first to go down, I think.
Ron Hextall even said that at his end of season press conference. He was asked who were a couple guys who he saw as guys who had earned a longer look in training camp, and the 2 guys that he mentioned were Philippe Myers and Nicolas Aube-Kubel. So Philippe Myers, he definitely has a shot. I think he probably has as much of a shot as Travis Sanheim did at this time last offseason. A lot of people saw it as maybe a potential he could possibly make the team, but it was seen as more likely that it was going to be Robert Haig and Sam Morin, just because they were in the system for longer. They were older guys. But obviously Travis Sanheim beat the odds there, so I think Philippe Myers has a shot.
And Morin was hurt again, so he had to go. Yeah, he went back down and was hurt, which sucks for him because it was kind of a lost year for him because of injuries and everything. Exactly. And this injury just puts him back even more. Which then makes you think: is he just too much of an injury risk, or do you want to risk going forward with him?
I mean, when you look at guys like Philippe Myers and Sam Morin, they do have long injury histories. For Morin, it looked like he had kind of stopped that. I mean, in juniors, he had a long list of injuries. I remember in his final junior year, he broke his jaw, which, I mean, a lot of his seemed to be injuries that were kind of fluky injuries that just kind of happened. And then that was shown in Lehigh Valley because he wasn't getting injured as much. Right. But this past season was just injury after injury after injury. And for Myers,
his was always like concussions and everything.
And they've always happened. It's never gone away. Yeah. It's just always been there. So I mean, but I'd rather have a guy who shows as much dynamic ability as Philippe Myers has at every level, who can only play, I guess, 60 games just because they get injured every year. I'd rather have that than someone who's just a third pairing meh guy who's barely an NHLer, but he can play every game. Like I'd rather have the guy who may not play every game, but he when he's there, he's making a difference for the team.
And then there's also Kubel, where, I mean, he's the name that I've heard a lot mentioned for the Phantoms, but he always seems to have issues with suspensions and all that. And I wonder if that will play a role at all if Hextall were to have him on the team next year or not.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Because isn't he suspended for like 3 games?
Yeah, he had a suspension of, I believe 3 games. And he's been suspended, I think, multiple times this postseason, even, not just overall. It's strange. I mean, he's a guy who, I mean, after his most recent suspension, his coach pretty much went out and defended him and said there was nothing he needed to change about his game. So he's going to play exactly the same way. And I assume if his coach is saying that in Lehigh Valley, that's just being echoing what's going on in the front office. So I would assume his odds are just as likely for the Phantoms. But, I mean, if you look at his numbers in the playoffs so far, he's played 6 games. He hasn't put up a point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he played great this year. He had great even strength numbers especially. He didn't get a lot of time in the power play. But, I mean, in the playoffs so far, it hasn't been good with the suspensions and along with just not producing offensively. But, yeah, the number that really sticks out, though, when you look at the Phantoms in the playoffs this year is Alex Lyon. 959 save percentage. Obviously, that's inflated a bit by the 94 save performance he had in that 5 overtime game, but he did make those saves. Yes. So as much inflated as by 1 game, he made those saves. In 5 overtimes. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount
of time
of energy that it requires for a goalie to keep making these stops. I mean, he's standing there that entire time. He doesn't even get to sit on the bench like the players. I mean, he's standing there the whole time. When it's in his defensive zone, which it was a lot. I mean, you look at the numbers; the Phantoms didn't even have 60 shots, and he saw 95. So a lot of the time he was crouched in position in his zone, in his own zone. So he was wasting a lot of energy, and he still made all these saves. So he earned each and every one of them. So he's been fantastic. And you look at offensively, they've needed him because despite making it to the conference final, there's not a player on the team who's at a point per game other than Oscar Lindblom, but he hasn't played all 9 playoff games for them. No.
But he's done better since those few games for the Flyers when he was up. He kind of like disappeared near the end, and then the series he kind of disappeared, was put on the 4th line, and then scratched.
Yeah, it seemed at the beginning of his Flyers tenure, he struggled a little bit at the beginning, and then he got up to speed, and he started playing a lot better once he was with Nolan Patrick. And once the playoffs started, it looked like he kind of had that learning curve again, and the Flyers really couldn't afford to let him make that, to pass that learning curve there. Yeah. So I didn't really have a giant problem with him being sat in the playoffs just because he wasn't playing well.
Right.
I understand why he was sat because he wasn't playing well. It wasn't like a Travis Konechny situation in the past where it was just like this, he's producing offensively, but that defense. But for Lindblom, I mean, he just didn't look good. So I was fine with that.
That's more the Sanheim he had a problem with.
Yeah, exactly. But this, and I'm glad to see that he's at a point per game in the playoffs this year with the Phantoms. So I'm looking forward to seeing him again next season.
Yeah, hopefully it's a better year for him because he definitely had some up. Like he could have easily put up more points. Like he looked.
I mean, he was always involved. It always seemed like he would have gotten like a tertiary assist, like a third assist if that existed. But it doesn't. I mean, that line with Nolan Patrick and
Voracek
Jake
were
Voracek,
always
they
producing
they constantly they put up a lot of
close.
points. It was just Lindblom for some reason just wasn't on. Wasn't showing up on the stat sheet. But he was very good. I was impressed with him this season with the Flyers.
He should have a good career for the Flyers.
Yeah,
if not like as like maybe a 3rd line winger or 2nd line winger or something like that. But
yeah, I think he's gonna be. I don't know if he's ever gonna be a top line guy, but he'll be a middle sixer who puts up 50 points a year, reliable guy. I'm very happy
for next year going
with
forward. I think, but you saw if you put Couturier or Konechny back on that first line, you have 2 really good lines.
Yeah, their top 6 for next year, I think is. At least for me, it would already be set with the line we just mentioned, along with the Giroux, Couturier, and Voracek, and Konechny on the top line. I think that's a great top 6 moving forward. I mean,
and then the rest of it you play it by ear because you don't know if we sign
the assumption
Filppula or do we send another veteran kind of guy like him.
Yeah, and is
if we trade Simmons, if we don't trade Simmons.
Exactly. So a lot of that is up in the air. Their bottom 6 is something that's going to.
Mm-hmm. But that could also be where Abe Kubel could come in too.
Exactly. He's someone who has a chance to get a spot on that 3rd or 4th line. I really hope that they try to recreate what they did at the start of this past season with that 4th line, focusing a lot more on speed
and everything,
and a line that, although they didn't produce a ton of points, it was something. It was a line that could produce offensively, or at least had the ability to threaten the score offensively, not just one that's just a checking.
The line of Lawton, Lear, and Raffle, you're saying?
Yeah. I think that's something that the Flyers should look to recreate instead of. I know Ron Hextall has talked about adding another penalty killer. And that being important just because of how poorly they played in the penalty kill.
I mean, that makes sense to want to do because that's obviously an area where they've struggled the most this season.
Exactly.
Not even just that, both special teams have been a struggle for the Flyers.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. My thing is I hope that they can get a guy who is genuinely a 3rd-line center. It's something I'm assuming that they're going to be looking into. It seems like Valtteri Filppula is their last resort.
Yeah.
But I hope that they can get a legitimate 3rd-line center who can produce offensively, some at least, but also on the penalty kill. I don't want it to be like you get a 3rd-line center and then you get like a fucking Chris Van de Velde. Like just someone who's known for being a penalty killer. Like not being able to produce anything offensively, but in his defensive zone, he's not terrible.
Yeah.
I don't want that type of situation. No. I want someone who isn't as one-dimensional as that.
A better version of Lawton, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I want someone who can play two-way hockey. I think that's something you need in a 3rd-line center.
That is. Which I guess is what you had before when you had Couturier playing center, but...
Yeah, I mean, when...
you still would need another piece there, but...
Yeah, I think that they definitely need to add a 3rd-line center. It's something that is definitely a need.
Especially if they want to try to contend now. I mean, they have the cap or a better cap this season too.
Yeah, they have a lot of cap space to work with. Obviously, some of that you want to set aside just so you can start signing guys for long term, like Ivan Provorov, all the young guys.
But
they do have the space. They do have some money to play with, whether it be adding a guy in a trade like a Mike Hoffman, who supposedly they had talked to Ottawa about at least some prior to the deadline. Someone who has some terms, some contract, some a higher cap hit that they can add to the roster. They do have some room to play with there.
And I have a feeling Ottawa's going to want to be busy this offseason.
Yeah, I think they're going to be, especially with the fact that they're not going to have their own first-round pick next year.
No.
I think they're going to be looking to add as much as they can in the future in terms of draft picks.
Their only problem is if they do it again with what they tried doing with Karlsson, where they're just asking too much.
That could be a factor. Pierre Dorian, I don't see him as being too terribly good of a general manager. No. So I don't know
the whole
what to
kind
expect
of organization kind of crumbled in the last couple months.
Yeah, that's just the tire fire in Ottawa. Just
because even Karlsson doesn't want to stay. No one really.
Yeah, Eugene Melnick's just such a.
That was a terrible trade just to get Duchesne.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to say they upgraded from Turris to Duchesne, Turris, who they sent to Nashville in that 3-team trade, I can see it to an extent, but they did not. They didn't add enough to where trading that first-round pick was worth it. I know that they saw themselves as being a late first-round pick because they saw themselves as in a playoff team for a second year in a row. Obviously, that's
they
not
also
the case,
were probably banking on Colorado being a worse team than they were.
Because
they were terrible the year before, but thanks to McKinnon, who I think he is.
I think Colorado's banking on them being worse too, because I mean, not that the Duchesne situation was ever going to be resolved, but Duchesne on that team, they would have been even better in the playoffs. So.
Probably, but
it opened up an opportunity for Nathan McKinnon, so I think they're okay with that.
And I think his nomination for Hart is worthy. I mean, those last couple weeks or whatever where he wasn't doing the best near the end, I don't really mind as much because most of the season he made the team that was so terrible the year before. Playoff team. I mean,
Yeah, he was a guy who definitely provided a lot of value to his team as the Hart Trophy.
Even though I feel like it's not even a contest, people are just it's gonna probably be Hall.
I think it's definitely gonna be Taylor Hall to win.
But I do think McKinnon. I don't know we didn't want to talk about, it, but McDavid should have been. on there too.
I don't understand why McDavid wasn't nominated. I know it's the playoff thing of most valuable to your team and how valuable could you be if you're not in the playoffs, but how fucking bad would the Edmonton Oilers be if they didn't have Connor McDavid?
Exactly.
They would be so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Their top line would be what? I mean, Draisaitl, who I guess is about a first-line center, although he's getting paid way too much.
Mm-hmm.
Centering Lucic and at the start of the year, Maroon.
They would be better if they didn't make that trade with New Jersey too.
Oh yeah, they'd be a lot better if they had kept Hall and not traded him for Larson.
Yeah.
Peter Chiarelli is just he's one of those guys who everyone in Philadelphia should be pleading to Ron Hextall to never let him get off the phone. Just the two of them should be talking 24/7 because if you can talk to him long enough, if you can talk to Peter Chiarelli long enough, he will give you a very good player in exchange for very little. So he's someone who you really want your general manager talking to.
I know this is I doubt the Flyers will actually get or maybe even qualifying offer to Tavares, but if he's not going back to New York, do you think the Flyers even send him an offer sheet or say, hey, maybe here, or do you think that's way too much for them to want to risk?
I mean, because
he's gonna want to get a big pay check, obviously. But
he's hitting unrestricted free agency on July 1st, and from what I've seen or what I've heard, Bob McKenzie said recently that, or it might have been Darren Dreger or Pierre LeBrun, one of the three of them, said that they see it is pretty much done that Tavares is not returning to the Islanders. In terms of the Flyers, I mean, they do have the cap space to do it, and he's the type of player who,
I mean, every center.
He's the type of player who every single team should be calling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much he'd want to come to the Flyers. At the end of the day, every team's pretty much going to be offering him about the same amount. Although, I mean, if you're looking at a team like Pittsburgh or someone who would call him, they'd really be selling the ability to win rather than the money because they wouldn't really be able to afford it as much. But pretty much every team's going to be offering around $10, $11 million, trying to make him the highest paid player in the league. And I think the Flyers should be one of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's someone who I'm fine with dedicating a lot of my cap space to really good players because he's that great of a player.
You could get the Penguins with Kessel.
Exactly. I mean, he's someone who, if you look at Stanley Cup winners in the past, I mean, you need depth in this at the center position. You need as many good centers as possible.
But then it makes the thing of who he would then always probably take over for Couturier on the first center spot or however that would play out.
At the end of the day, I don't give a shit how that plays out. It plays out how it plays out. True. I mean, you're adding. I mean, a really
you do
good player.
Get 3 good centers, another good penalty killer. So I mean,
at the end of the day, it's something that every single team should be calling John Tavares and his agent about.
I feel like him.
I don't think that the Flyers are necessarily going to be a team that he's going to be that interested in. I have no inside information on that at all. I hope that he would, for some reason, want to come here. I don't really see any incentive for him to.
Nope.
But I think that Ron Hextall wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't calling him.
Yeah.
Because if he does, for some reason, have that want to be in Philadelphia, get him here.
And I would think Kovalchuk will probably be another popular person teams would want to try to add.
Yeah, Ilya Kovalchuk coming over from Russia.
Even though he's very specific on where he would want to play.
Yeah, it seems like he's more focusing geographically on where he wants to play. It sounds like either in the New York area, or in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So the two teams that have been rumored the most being the New York Rangers.
Yeah,
it seems as though he at least really wants to play for the Rangers. I'm not sure where they are. I know obviously with their rebuild, I'm not sure how much money they'd really want to be giving to him. But also the Florida Panthers.
Aren't they already giving a good amount of money to Shattenkirk?
Yeah, I mean last season they had a similar situation where Shattenkirk wanted to play for the Rangers.
A lot of teams.
They had a hard time.
There's a lot of big name free agents that always want to go to New York. And
it seems like a lot of the, obviously Kovalchuk doesn't fit into this, but a lot of the American free agents see Madison Square Garden, I think, and the New York just area and being a star in New York as being a big plus.
Keith Yandel went there. It's always they get traded there, but they never re-sign. Well, Yandel was, but you have Shattenkirk who signed there and others.
Yeah, it's a popular place, but I think at the end of the day, Kovalchuk probably signs one of those teams, either the Panthers or the Rangers. I don't see the Flyers really factoring in there.
No. But even if he goes, that's not like a bad decision to go to Florida if it really goes down to it, because they were almost knocked the Flyers out. They came that close.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those situations where you look at it, and when you look at goaltending, I mean, that's not a team that should
but also just think of how much better they would have been if they didn't get rid they didn't get rid of Carlson and...
Well, not Carlson, Marchessault and Riley Smith.
Mm-hmm.
2/3 of that great first line that we were just talking about coming from Florida. The Panthers, I don't really see as a team... I think this year was kind of like a Senators-esque run.
Yeah.
I think it was mainly just Roberto Luongo played out of his fucking mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really see that as something that's going to continue in the future just because he's, 37, 38?
He's got to be up there.
He's an older guy, so I don't know how many years he has left in him.
True.
And I think that was something where, if they had made the playoffs, maybe they were a team who could win a series or two just on his back. But at this point,
he did. When he was in Vancouver.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see the Panthers as a team who is going to be a future power anytime soon.
Kovalchuk definitely helps that though. If he were to
sign. If he were to sign, he'd definitely be a plus.
I mean, I don't think Tampa would have the cap space, but he would.
They do fit the geographical area. I mean,
they're the better team if he would want to win.
Yeah, I just don't see how they could fit him under the cap because he's still going to be someone who's going to demand a lot. He's going to. He's probably going to be demanding somewhere north of $7 million.
And I'm going to assume he's going to want to, if not like New York, but like a good team, because he left New Jersey because he kind of figured they weren't going to be very well anymore.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a factor.
Obviously, money, but
one of the only other rumor I've heard with him is the fact that in one of his 31 thoughts, Elliot Freeman mentioned that the Edmonton Oilers called his agent. Right now, teams are able to talk to Kovalchuk at the moment, although he's not eligible to sign until July 1st. And it's supposedly the Oilers expressed some interest, but Kovalchuk shot it down immediately. Yeah. It's not something he's interested in, and I don't know if that's. I think it's more geographical because obviously that's pretty much as far away as you can get from those two areas, New York and Florida. Yeah. So I don't know if it's that or if it's team oriented, but I would assume it's probably more geographic.
Probably.
You want to wrap up?
Sure.
All right.
And that will do it for another Mike and Mitch podcast. Thanks for listening.